In just 1 week in 1967, Israel decisively defeated 3 Arab armies in what became known as the Six-Day War. But how did Israel, fighting on 3 fronts, achieve such a swift and overwhelming victory, and why were the Arab states unable to respond in time? Nearly 20 years after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the Middle East remained gripped by the political aftermath of the creation of the Jewish state. Palestinians in the Egyptian-controlled Gaza Strip and the Jordanian-controlled West Bank still hoped that a future war would destroy Israel and lead to their own state in its place. Meanwhile, Syria supported Palestinian groups like Fatah, encouraging attacks to destabilize Israel. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, seeking to become the leader of the Arab world amid a wave of pan-Arab nationalism, felt emboldened after the U.S. and Soviet Union had intervened to Egypt's advantage during the 1956 Suez Crisis. At the same time, Israel had grown militarily stronger, but remained geographically isolated and surrounded by hostile neighbors. Before 1967, divisions plagued Israel's Arab adversaries. In 1961, Syrian officers loyal to Nasser's pan-Arab ideals launched a failed coup, prompting the Ba'athist government in Damascus to purge its ranks, damaging relations with Egypt. Jordan's King Hussein also clashed with Nasser over policy toward the Palestinians and even survived an Egyptian-backed assassination attempt in 1962. Yet, despite their differences, the destruction of Israel was a unifying goal among the Arab states. Most Arab leaders played to public opinion, taking hardline stances against Israel, while cross-border raids became routine. Syrian forces and Palestinian militants frequently targeted Israeli civilians, especially in the Golan Heights, prompting Israeli reprisals. Syria then used these retaliations to mock Egypt for its supposed inaction. After one such Palestinian raid on November 13, 1966, Israeli troops struck the West Bank village of Samu. Nasser, unwilling to provoke war, chose not to respond, drawing further criticism from Syria and Jordan for abandoning the Arab cause. Tensions escalated again on April 7, 1967, when Syrian shelling of Israeli border towns triggered Israeli airstrikes on Syrian artillery positions. In the ensuing dogfight, Israeli Mirage jets downed 7 Syrian MiG-21s and flew triumphantly over Damascus. Each clash only fueled public pressure across the region to act. Then, on May 14th, the Soviet Union falsely warned Nasser that Israel was preparing to attack Syria. Though the claim was soon disproven by Soviet, Syrian, and Egyptian sources, the damage was done. Unwilling to appear weak, Nasser ordered Field Marshal Abdel Hakim Amer to deploy Egyptian troops into the Sinai, near Israel's border. On May 19th, the United Nations Emergency Force, UNEF, stationed in the Sinai since 1956, withdrew at Nasser's demand. That same day, Israeli Prime Minister Levi Eshkol doubled Israel's mobilized reserves and sent 300 tanks south. Nasser believed he could pressure Israel politically, boost his image, and strengthen his regional leadership. On May 21st, he announced the closure of the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, waters Israel had forced open in 1956. Nasser saw the move as a way to correct a past humiliation, elevate his prestige, and assert Arab unity, without triggering a full-scale war, as thousands of Egyptian soldiers marched triumphantly through Cairo's streets. Toward Sinai, the Arab public's appetite for war swelled, and outlets such as Radio Cairo poured out fiery rhetoric. With the Gulf of Aqaba closed, Israel confronted 2 grim possibilities: either be economically and politically strangled by Arab boycott and military pressure, or face annihilation by surrounding armies pressing in from south, north, and east. For Israel, the Straits of Tiran were a vital commercial sea lane, and their blockade was treated as an act of war. In the larger Middle Eastern mosaic, Nasser's move had just slotted a decisive piece into place. Effectively, the ball lay in Israel's court. Prime Minister Eshkol ordered a full military mobilization, grinding the Israeli economy to a halt. Women and children dug trenches and prepared mass graves in Tel Aviv as reservists were summoned across the country. On June 4th, as Arab saber-rattling reached a fever pitch, Israel's war cabinet approved a preemptive strike. The assault was timed for 7 a.m. on June 5, 1967. On the eve of war, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, totaled about 264,000 men, including reservists, and fielded roughly 1,000 tanks, many upgraded from World War II designs. They also had well-trained crews for around 250 combat aircraft capable of flying double sorties. Egypt, by comparison, had approximately 100,000 troops and 950 tanks in Sinai, plus some 282 combat aircraft. Syria deployed 75,000 soldiers with 300 tanks in the Golan Heights and about 120 fighter jets. Jordan, with a British-trained army, mustered about 55,000 troops, over 300 mostly modern tanks, and 24 modern fighters. Israeli leaders were resolved this fight would not mirror the near-run 1948 conflict. The preemptive plan had been refined for years. Mossad placed agents within many Arab militaries, including operatives like German-born Wolfgang Lotz, who befriended senior Egyptian officers while posing as a former SS man. Those clandestine networks let Israel pinpoint the location of every Egyptian aircraft on the ground and often identify pilots by name, rank, and even voice. Israeli pilots rehearsed their missions so thoroughly that air and ground crews knew targets and timetables before takeoff orders came. Pilots launched from different bases at staggered times and kept strict radio silence. By 7:30 a.m. on June 5th, nearly 200 Israeli jets were en route to their targets, flying extremely low to evade radar. Coincidentally, Egyptian anti-aircraft batteries lacked fire orders because Field Marshal Amer was due to land at an airbase later that morning. Within an hour, Israeli fighters had knocked out almost all Egyptian airfields, severed communications between Sinai and Egyptian Army headquarters, killed over a third of Egypt's pilots, and destroyed the majority of Egyptian combat aircraft. The Israeli Air Force simultaneously struck Syrian and Jordanian airstrips, destroying more than half of Syria's aircraft and most of Jordan's planes and runways. Ground offensives followed. Along the coast, Israeli armor bypassed Rafah and the Gaza Strip to accelerate the thrust into Sinai. Egyptian formations were taken by surprise and rapidly overwhelmed as the IDF pushed forward. An Egyptian pilot later, Hashim Mustafa, recalled the chaos as a second wave swept in. Many ran across the desert seeking shelter, pilots with advanced jets resorting to pistols. A devastating one-sided loss ratio. Israel lost only 9 planes. Surprise struck as Israeli Centurion and Patton tanks emerged from the dust, thundering into position. We were suddenly exposed to a heavy armored assault from multiple directions, one Egyptian officer recalled, with the sea at our backs in the north and relentless air and artillery bombardments overhead. We had almost no communication with other command posts and no idea what was unfolding on the battlefield. While Israeli armor surged toward the Suez Canal in northern Sinai, another column under Major General Ariel Sharon smashed through Egyptian defenses at Katef, driving toward Abu Agela. Israeli mechanized infantry and tanks advanced behind dense artillery barrages, while helicopter-borne paratroopers descended to silence Egyptian gun batteries. By nightfall, Egypt's 7th and 20th Divisions were shattered. At 4 p.m., an emotional Field Marshal Amer briefed President Nasser. Both men agreed to conceal the extent of the disaster, fearing Syria and Jordan might abandon the fight if the truth emerged. By the end of the first day, Israel had effectively destroyed the combined Egyptian, Jordanian, and Syrian air forces. In Sinai, Egypt's forward line of defense had collapsed, and its forces were retreating eastward. Meanwhile, Jordan dashed Israeli hopes of neutrality when King Hussein ordered cross-border attacks. In response, Israeli troops pushed into the West Bank and advanced toward East Jerusalem, across both the southern and eastern fronts. Jordanian and Egyptian resistance was fierce, but Israel's superior speed, firepower, and coordination proved decisive. The next day, the battle for Jerusalem began. Since 1948, the city had been divided along tense armistice lines, West Jerusalem under Israeli control and East Jerusalem, including sacred religious sites, under Jordanian rule. Between them lay a deadly maze of barbed wire, bunkers, and no man's land. Israeli forces held the Mount Scopus enclave, while Jordanian troops manned the Ottoman walls surrounding the Old City. At 2 a.m. on June 6th, Israeli tanks, mortars, and rockets opened fire on Jordanian positions. Paratroopers then assaulted the heavily fortified Ammunition Hill, defended by the 2nd Al-Husseini Battalion. The fighting was brutal. Jordanian troops knocked out 2 Israeli tanks, and one Jordanian officer even called artillery fire on his own position. The battle devolved into savage hand-to-hand combat. By 5 a.m., the Israelis had taken the hill, but at a cost. 31 Israelis and 71 Jordanians lay dead. Elsewhere, Israeli paratroopers stormed the American colony area farther south, but after a wrong turn, they walked into a deadly ambush. Paratrooper Yigal Nir remembered. Suddenly, the street became a slaughterhouse. In seconds, everyone around me was hit. I had never felt fear before, but now I felt abandoned and utterly hopeless. Fighting raged street by street. Israeli tanks, infantry, and sappers battled through fortified Jordanian strongholds, seizing the Rockefeller Archaeological Museum, the railway station, and the former UN headquarters in the south. Overhead, Israeli jets, unchallenged in the skies, devastated Jordanian reinforcements moving in from the east. King Hussein later recalled the horrifying scene left behind. "I will never forget the ghastly sight of that defeat. Roads jammed with twisted, burning vehicles, metal and paint scorched by bombs, the air thick with smoke. Amid the wreckage, wounded and exhausted men tried to clear a path as Israeli mirages screamed overhead in a cloudless sky seared by the sun. By midday, only the Old City of Jerusalem remained in Jordanian hands. To the north, Syria launched a ground offensive, but it quickly collapsed. Syrian tank crews discovered that the bridges they needed to cross were too narrow for their T-34s, and local Israeli militias repelled the only Syrian ground attack of the war. At the same time, Israeli forces in Sinai routed the remaining Egyptian resistance and drove hard toward the Suez Canal, while in Gaza, Egyptian troops, now surrounded on 3 sides, struggled desperately to hold their ground. IDF units overwhelmed Palestinian militias in fierce urban combat, and by nightfall, both Field Marshal Amer and King Hussein ordered their forces to fall back to new defensive positions. After another day of sweeping Israeli successes, Jerusalem's Old City was now within reach, and the Egyptian army stood on the verge of collapse. Through the night of June 7th, Jordanian soldiers still holding out in the Old City watched as their reinforcements were obliterated by Israeli airstrikes. Their supplies were nearly gone, and as Israeli troops encircled the area, the Jordanians withdrew, leaving the Old City largely undefended. Israeli Colonel Mata Gur of the 55th Paratroop Brigade sent a historic message to his battalion commanders. "We occupy the heights overlooking the Old City. Soon we will enter it, the ancient city of Jerusalem for which generations have dreamed and fought. We will be the first to enter. The Jewish people await our victory. Be proud. Good luck." Moments later, Gur's paratroopers advanced onto the Haram al-Sharif, known to Jews as the Temple Mount, and soon reached the Western Wall. For Israelis and Jews worldwide, photographs of paratroopers praying before the wall became the defining image of the war. For King Hussein, however, it was a catastrophe. His army and air force lay in ruins, part of his kingdom was lost, and he had failed to protect Islam's third holiest site. Meanwhile, on the Egyptian front, Israeli troops landed unopposed at Sharm el-Sheikh, reopening the Straits of Tiran. The Egyptian army was nearing total breakdown. As columns of tanks, trucks, and soldiers jammed the desert roads, Israeli jets struck relentlessly with napalm and cannon fire, while IDF ground units raced ahead to seize the Mitla and Gidi. Passes, key choke points leading to the Suez Canal. There, they ambushed disoriented Egyptian forces in retreat. Egyptian troops resisted as best they could, even making effective use of T-55 tanks against Israel's lighter AMX armor. But what began as an organized withdrawal quickly degenerated into chaos. "Everyone lost their heads," one Egyptian officer recalled. "We were told to retreat, but when we arrived, the positions were already in flames." The army on the roads was in total collapse. It was a massacre, a disaster. By June 8th, the catastrophe in Sinai deepened. The IDF captured so many Egyptian prisoners that they began disarming and releasing them to cross the Suez Canal on foot. There were also reports of Israeli soldiers executing Egyptian captives during the retreat. By that evening, Israeli forces had reached the canal in the north. Egypt's army had lost roughly 80% of its equipment, including 10,000 trucks, 700 tanks, and hundreds of artillery pieces. Amid the confusion, tragedy struck when Israeli planes and torpedo boats mistakenly attacked the American intelligence ship USS Liberty off the Egyptian coast, killing 34 U.S. sailors. Both nations launched investigations and ruled the incident a case of mistaken identity. Even as Egyptian state media boasted of victories in Sinai, President Nasser and Field Marshal Amir privately conceded defeat. At 7:43 p.m., Nasser announced that Egypt would accept a UN ceasefire and even declared his intent to resign. Massive street protests in Cairo erupted, demanding he stay in power, so he did. But Egypt's war was effectively over. With Jordan and Egypt out of the fight, Israel turned its attention north towards Syria. The Syrian defensive lines on the Golan Heights were formidable, set in rugged, rocky terrain overlooking Israeli settlements below. Minefields guarded the few roads to the top, and Syrian troops had entrenched tanks and artillery in fortified bunkers that offered some shelter from air attacks. Yet, Syria's forces were poorly trained and demoralized, weakened by internal purges and lacking proper leadership, air cover, or modern equipment. Many of their tanks were outdated, including World War II-era German Panzer Bofors. On June 9th at 9:40 a.m., Israel unleashed a massive artillery and air bombardment, guided by intelligence gathered by the late Israeli spy Eli Cohen. Over 1,000 Israeli airstrikes pummeled Syrian positions, though many bunkers survived. As ground troops advanced, Syrian defenses inflicted heavy losses, slowing Israeli tanks and bulldozers struggling through mines and boulders. When Israeli infantry finally reached the Syrian trenches, brutal close combat followed. 30 Israelis and 60 Syrians were killed before the positions were cleared. When Israel attacked again on June 10th, they found the Syrian lines deserted. Units had already withdrawn toward Quneitra. A false radio report claiming Quneitra had fallen sparked panic, sending Syrian troops fleeing chaotically toward Damascus. Even Syrian. The Six-Day War. Israel's lightning victory, 1967. In the chaos of retreat, Egyptian front commander Ahmed al-Mir flees on horseback. An Israeli commander reports, "We arrived almost without hindrance at the gates of Quneitra. Everything was in working order. Tanks with their engines still running, communication equipment still operational. We captured Quneitra without a fight. It was the afternoon of June 10, 1967. With the road to Damascus now undefended, Syria accepted a UN ceasefire. After 6 days of near-constant combat across 3 fronts, the Six-Day War was over. But how did Israel achieve such a complete and decisive victory? First, at the element of surprise, Israel's preemptive strike caught the Arab militaries completely off guard. Their air defenses were unprepared for a full-scale assault, allowing the Israeli Air Force to annihilate the Egyptian, Jordanian, and most of the Syrian air forces within hours on the first day. This gave Israel total air superiority, enabling it to strike with impunity and focus on one front at a time. Second, the weakness of Arab armies. Corruption was rampant, logistics poor, and morale low. Conscripts lacked food, ammunition, and proper training. While Jordan's army was well-trained and disciplined, it was far too small to hold the West Bank alone. Third, flawed leadership. Field Marshal Abdel Hakim Amer, appointed largely due to his friendship with President Nasser, failed to react effectively to the Israeli onslaught. His premature retreat orders turned withdrawal into chaos, an outright rout. In Syria, political purges had hollowed out the officer corps, leaving the army uncoordinated and paralyzed. Though swift, the war carried a grim human cost. Israel lost 679 soldiers killed, with 15 taken prisoner. Arab casualties were catastrophic. Egypt lost around 11,000 dead and 5,000 captured. Jordan, 6,000 dead and 500 captured. Syria, 1,000 dead and 600 captured. For Palestinians, the outcome was devastating. Those in Gaza and the West Bank, who had hoped the war might bring independence, instead found themselves under Israeli occupation for the first time. Roughly 240,000 Palestinians fled to Jordan and other Arab states as refugees. In the Golan Heights, Arab Druze villages were split in two, families separated across the new ceasefire line. Across the Arab world, the shock of defeat ignited a wave of anti-Jewish violence. Riots in Egypt, Yemen, Libya, Morocco, Lebanon, Iraq, and Tunisia saw Jewish communities attacked. Synagogues burned and thousands expelled. Politically, the war reshaped the Middle East. Israel emerged militarily dominant. Its territory tripled in size. To many Israelis, it was nothing short of miraculous, a modern retelling of the David and Goliath story. In contrast, the Arab world called it al-Naqsa, the setback, vowing revenge and refusing peace or recognition of Israel. The stage was set for another confrontation. For the Palestinians, the Six-Day War marked the beginning of a long and unresolved occupation, one that continues to define the region nearly 60 years later. The conflict was also part of the broader Cold War chessboard, another proxy battlefield where ideology and influence collided. Just before the war, Israel is believed to have acquired its first nuclear weapon. While in the Soviet Union, the dream of atomic power was being built into the very foundations of its cities, the Atomgrads. One of these was near a small Ukrainian village called Pripyat. If you'd like to explore the Soviet nuclear program, from its origins in World War II to the Chernobyl disaster and beyond, and to watch our new documentary series Red Atoms, available exclusively on Nebula. Nebula is a streaming platform built by independent creators where we can tell the stories that matter without worrying about algorithms or ads. Visit Nebula.com to start watching Red Atoms and other Nebula original series. For those who want to go even further, a Nebula Lifetime membership is once again available for $300, directly supporting our work and helping us create even more ambitious history documentaries. This has been a real-time history production, the only history channel that truly holds the key to the Middle Eastern puzzle.